So now we're going to continue the review on to the next page, page 2. And in the first part, they're telling us that these two triangles are congruent, and it wants us to name 3 pairs of congruent sides and 3 pairs of congruent angles. So since we know that these 2 triangles are congruent, we can label the pieces that are also congruent. AB would correspond to DE. So those 2 sides, AB and DE, are congruent. So if we're talking about sides, we could write that AB is congruent to DE. Then we can say BC, the second and third letters, are congruent to EF. So BC, I'm going to use 2 tick marks to differentiate it, is congruent to EF. And I would write it as BC congruent to EF. And then lastly, for the sides, we know that AC, first and third, is congruent to DF, first and third. And I'm going to use 3 tick marks for this one. So AC congruent to DF. 3 pairs of congruent sides. We can also talk about angles. Okay. Angle A corresponds with angle D. So when we write this out, I can just use 1 letter for this angle to name it. Angle A congruent to angle D, and that's because only 1 point on this angle at A makes this triangle. If there were multiple angles that were formed with this vertex A and this vertex D, then we would have to use more than 1 letter to name it. Then we know that B, and I'll use 3 swoops, is congruent to angle E. So angle B congruent to angle E. And then lastly, these angles, angle C and angle F, will be congruent. I'm using 3 swoops. You could use a variety of different ways to show that those angles are congruent as well, different symbols. So angle C is congruent to angle F. It says to complete each statement, and if you need to, you can draw a picture of each pair of triangles. Again, we're just recognizing the order in which these points are listed so that we know which ones correspond to which other points. So WR is the first and second, so that side is going to correspond with PL. For 21, we're looking at angle T. We know that angle T will be congruent to angle N since the triangles are congruent and they correspond to each other. PS, third and first, would go with QM, third and first in the other triangle because the triangles are all congruent. XC, third and second, would go with PW. And it is very important that you're writing them in the correct order based on what they correspond with. So now we're going to switch up the order of the triangles. You can write the triangles in 3 different ways, obviously. Okay. So what we would do is we would have triangle RHK goes with triangle WVO. So KRH, K is the third, then R, then H, would go with triangle, don't forget that symbol, OWV. And then in the next one, angle M is in the middle, and that will go with angle D in the middle of the second triangle. Now, last year you learned about the methods to prove triangles congruent. You can have SSS, side, 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 SAS, side, angle, side, making sure that that angle is sandwiched between the 2 sides. Angle, side, angle, the side is sandwiched between the angles. And also my favorite, because it makes me think of Amos Alonzo Stagg, is angle, angle, side. What we cannot have is the swear word angle, okay? Because that will not work to prove triangles congruent. Now, the next part, it's saying to fill in the second triangle and state which theorem is used to prove the triangles congruent. If they cannot be proven congruent, write not possible, okay? So, for number 26, TSU, okay, we know that we have all 3 sides are corresponding to be congruent. So what we can say is if we have TSU, triangle TSU, it would be congruent to triangle XVW. Okay, the reason is we go through these two markings because we go from T to S to U, so 2 and then to the 3 markings. And in the other one, we'd have to go through the 2 markings and the 3 markings. So that has to be triangle XVW. The theorem, side, side, side. If it helps, you could label the sides. We know that we have all 3 sides congruent, so we know we can use SSS. Now the next one, notice how we have an angle, a side, and an angle. So hopefully we'll be able to prove that these 2 triangles are congruent. We have another angle, side, angle. So the theorem is ASA, and the way that we would show the 2 triangles are congruent, TUV, okay, so we go from this 1 angle marking to 2, then we'll go to have WXY congruent because we go from the single swoop to the double right here. Now we have this. So we have this figure where we know these are called vertical angles, and we know that vertical angles are congruent. Okay, vertical angles are when you form like an X type shape. You know that those opposite angles will be congruent. Now, we have an angle, a side, and a side. So if you were laughing before when I said you can't have the swear word for this one, it's because we have angle, side, side. That is not one of the methods for proving triangles congruent, so this one will be not possible. Remember, it's not appropriate to swear in school, so it's not appropriate to use the swear word in proving triangles congruent.